Native American Survival Story, Pittsburgh, 1786. Histories and Native Tales brings you forgotten tales from America's past. Subscribe to explore more untold stories of bravery, survival, and humanity at the edge of civilization. The autumn wind whistled through the gaps of Pittsburgh's wooden buildings as darkness crept across the sky in 1786. The temperature had dropped to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, forcing settlers to huddle close to their hearths. Yet on this particular evening, the warmth of one family's fire was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. A figure materialized on their porch, not standing proud like the warriors of his tribe, but slumped against a crude wooden pole, his frame so gaunt the bones pressed visibly against his skin. His clothing, once sturdy leather and cloth, now hung in tatters. 3 deep gashes marked his deerskin leggings, and dried blood had turned the fabric a dark, rusted brown. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper in broken English. "Milk, please." The young girl who answered the door took 2 instinctive steps backward. Where muscle and sinew should have been, only hollow shadows remained. The stranger's right leg bent at an unnatural angle, forcing him to lean heavily on his makeshift cane, a stripped sapling barely thick enough to support his weight. Deep lines of exhaustion carved valleys across his face, and his eyes, sunken deep in their sockets, reflected the last rays of dying sunlight. She disappeared inside, her feet pounding against wooden floorboards. Within moments, she returned with her entire family clustering behind her. Father with his musket held low but ready, mother clutching her other 2 children close, all drawn by the haunting spectacle on their doorstep. Blood had long since dried on his tattered leggings, and fresh stains marked each painful step of his progress. His chest heaved with the effort of staying upright. Every breath seemed to tax his remaining strength, yet still he persisted. Milk. The garrison at Pittsburgh erupted into activity as word spread through the ranks. Located 23 miles from Walter's Fort along the Pennsylvania Road, the military outpost housed 200 soldiers under the command of General William Irwin. The general dispatched 4 guards immediately, not to protect against 1 wounded man, but to ensure his survival through the night. Inside the fort's stone walls, measuring 40 feet on each side, the mysterious visitor received his first real meal in what the surgeon estimated to be at least 14 days of near starvation. A wooden bowl of hot broth steamed in front of him, alongside fresh bread and the milk he had so desperately sought. The guards noted how he ate, slowly, deliberately, each movement precise despite his obvious hunger. Only then, with sustenance coursing through his veins, did he begin to speak to Joseph Nicholas, the fort's interpreter. "Shot," he managed between careful sips of broth, his spoon scraping the bottom of the wooden bowl. "By Mingo hunter, when I try reach white people." The words hung in the air, each one measured carefully. Joseph Nicholas leaned forward, studying the man before him. 15 years of experience as an interpreter had taught him to watch for the subtle signs. The slight tensing of shoulders, the careful choice of words, the way the eyes moved when recounting events. The wounded man's gaze remained fixed on his empty bowl. This was 1786, in the midst of the Northwest Indian War. For 10 years between 1785 and 1795, the frontier had become a dangerous chess game of alliances and betrayals. In the previous month alone, 3 settler families had been attacked within 50 miles of Pittsburgh. Every knock at a door could bring either friend or foe. Every stranger's approach could mean trade or tragedy. The interpreter pulled his stool closer, the wood scraping against stone floor. His next words came slowly, deliberately. "Tell me again," he said quietly, "about how you came to be here. Start from the beginning. Tell me about the day you were shot." The wounded man's fingers tightened around his wooden spoon. Outside the fort's walls, the autumn wind continued to howl, carrying with it the first bite of winter. But within the torchlit room, time seemed to stop as he drew in a deep breath, preparing to speak. The interpreter's steady gaze finally broke through the wounded man's resistance. His shoulders slumped, and the truth emerged in halting fragments, like water through a cracked vessel. "Last moon." His voice grew stronger as he spoke. "We were 12 warriors, watched settlement for 3 days, counted routines, marked paths, attacked at Walter's Fort when sun touched morning sky. The fort stood 23 miles from Pittsburgh along the Pennsylvania Road, 8 miles from present-day Greensburg. A wooden stockade rose 15 feet high, logs stripped of bark and sharpened to points, offering refuge to 6 local families. By day, they worked the surrounding fields. By night, they retreated behind its walls. Each family had their own corner in the 40 by 40-foot enclosure, with a central watchtower rising another 10 feet above the walls. That fateful morning, Old Man Walter had led his family into the wheat field at first light. His daughter's skirts brushed through the golden stalks as she worked beside her 2 brothers, all 3 moving in practiced rhythm with their scythes. Their rifles lay propped against a fence post 30 yards away, a fatal mistake born from months of peaceful harvests. The attacking party had divided into 3 groups. 4 warriors circled wide to cut off escape to the fort. 5 others positioned themselves between the family and their weapons. The remaining 3, including the wounded storyteller, prepared for the direct assault. The first warning came as a shadow passing through the tree line. Within seconds, war cries split the air. The sound froze the workers for 2 precious heartbeats before survival instinct took hold. The family sprinted for their weapons, boots pounding against hard earth. The daughter's fingers had just grazed her rifle's stock when rough hands seized her arms. Her screams pierced the morning stillness. Old Man Walter and his sons fought their way back, the crack of their rifles echoing across the field. They had managed to snatch up 2 weapons before the attack, and now they put them to desperate use. The eldest son's shot found its mark. One of the warriors fell, clutching his chest. The younger brother's bullet splintered a tree trunk inches from another attacker's head. 150 yards from the fort's gates, a bullet found the elder Walter's leg. He crumpled to the ground, blood soaking into the wheat he'd been harvesting moments before. The wounded Indian's voice grew tight as he recalled what happened next. I reached for his scalp. His fingers unconsciously traced the motion. Drew knife with right hand, grabbed hair with left. Blade touched skin, then pain exploded in my leg. A marksman in the fort's watchtower had spotted him through a gap in the logs. The Indian's war cry transformed into a howl of agony as the bullet shattered his right leg, just above the knee. Bone fragments tore through muscle as he fell. He dragged himself into the underbrush, lying mere yards from the path as settlers rushed past in pursuit of his retreating companions. For 3 days he remained motionless in those bushes. Leaves provided his only camouflage as search parties combed the area. Their boots passed close enough to shower him with dirt, yet none spotted his concealed form. He pressed his face into the earth when dogs came near, having rubbed crushed wintergreen berries on his skin to mask his scent. Only after the 3rd sunset did he dare to move. His journey became a crawl through wilderness. Hands and one good foot propelled him forward inch by agonizing inch. Every movement sent shards of pain through his shattered leg. The wound festered despite his attempts to clean it with stream water and treat it with medicinal herbs. Fever came and went like waves on a shore. In a marsh 2 miles from his hiding spot, he found the pole that would become his lifeline. A young sapling stripped of its branches. The smooth wood became an extension of his body, taking weight off his ruined leg. Still, each step was an exercise in agony. He traveled by night when possible, using the stars to guide his course northward. The forest provided meager sustenance. Wintergreen berries, dandelion roots, and pine bark sustained him through 38 days of desperate travel. He learned to dig for tubers with one hand while balancing on his pole, to catch crayfish in shallow streams, to identify which mushrooms would nourish and which would poison. Rain provided water most days. During dry spells, he chewed on grass stems for moisture. He came upon a military post at Turtle Creek, 12 miles from Pittsburgh. For a full day, he observed from a hillside, debating surrender. The pain in his leg had become a constant fire, and his strength waned with each passing hour. Saw only militia there, he explained, his voice heavy with remembered fear. No regulars. Militia show no mercy to our people. Watched them shoot wounded brave year before. No quarter given. The distinction was well known among the tribes. Regular army troops followed rules of war, sometimes offering quarter to defeated enemies. They maintained discipline, treated prisoners with basic humanity. Militia forces were different. Comprised of settlers who had lost family and friends to raids, they rarely showed restraint. Their justice was swift and final. And so he had pressed on, his wounded leg leaving a trail of blood across 38 days and countless miles. The pole wore smooth beneath his grip as he dragged himself toward Pittsburgh. Each dawn questioned his decision to continue. Each dusk found him a few miles closer to his goal. The regular troops stationed there represented his last hope for survival. The interpreter studied the man before him, this warrior reduced to skin and bone, who had crawled through wilderness and survived on roots and berries, driven by the desperate hope that his enemies might show more mercy than his own people would have in their place. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of torches and the autumn wind's moan beyond the fort's walls. The wounded warrior's initial plan had been simple: cross the Allegheny River 20 miles north of Pittsburgh and make his way back to tribal lands. But after 4 failed attempts to swim the swift waters, his mangled leg and weakened body betrayed him. Each time the current swept him back to the eastern shore, the cold water sapping what little strength remained. With no choice left, he turned toward the garrison he'd known in peacetime. Several soldiers there still remembered him as Davy, a name given during trading days when 50 or more natives would gather within the fort's walls to exchange furs and stories. Now, 3 years later, he sat among those same walls as a prisoner. Through 10 days of recovery, Davy's behavior drew curious attention from the garrison. His thin face broke into ready smiles whenever soldiers passed his cell. He spoke softly in his broken English, asked after families he'd known before the war, and showed an almost desperate eagerness to please. The fort's surgeon noted how carefully he followed instructions during wound treatment, never crying out despite obvious pain. The question of his fate sparked fierce debate among the garrison's 200 men. Captain Rogers, who had traded with Davy's tribe, argued that the rules of war demanded fair treatment of prisoners. "He came to us for mercy," the captain told his fellow officers. "How do we differ from savages if we show none?" Sergeant Miller countered sharply. "The Indians follow no laws of war. They strike at women and children. They torture captives. Why should we grant them protections they never extend to us?" The debate might have remained theoretical, if not for the arrival of 3 women at the garrison's gates. The first, Sarah Walter, stood straight back despite her widow's black dress. Beside her, Mary Collins gripped a blood-stained shawl, all that remained of her daughter taken at the raid. The third, Hannah Rice, represented the settlement's council. Their demands cut through the garrison's philosophical discussion like a knife through butter. Give us the Indian. Let those who've buried their dead decide his punishment. Behind closed doors, the officers weighed their options. General William Irwin paced the floorboards as arguments flew. He's a prisoner of war entitled to protection. He's a murderer who attacked civilians. He came seeking mercy. He came because he had no choice. What message do we send if we turn him over? What uprising do we risk if we don't? Through the walls, they could hear the growing crowd outside. 75 settlers had gathered, their anger palpable in the October air. Reports came of another 100 marching from outlying farms. The garrison's 200 men could hold them off, but at what cost to already strained relations with the settlements they were meant to protect? For 6 hours, the council debated. The surgeon reported Davy would never fight again. His shattered leg would leave him permanently crippled. Some argued this justified mercy. Others countered that it made no difference to the dead at Walter's Fort. In the end, mathematics trumped morality. The garrison could not afford to lose the settlers' trust over one wounded enemy. At sunset, 4 militiamen arrived with a wagon. They found Davy sitting calmly in his cell, still managing a weak smile as they approached with chains. If he understood what his transfer meant, his face showed no sign as they led him away. At dawn, 4 militiamen hoisted Davy onto a bay mare for the 23-mile journey back to Walter's Fort. His shattered leg, though partially healed through 6 weeks of the garrison surgeon's care, hung awkwardly in a wooden splint. 2 rope lengths secured his wrists to the saddle horn, while a third bound his good leg to the stirrup. The autumn morning painted frost across the Pennsylvania road as the group set out. 8 armed riders flanked the prisoner, 2 in front, 2 behind, and 2 on each side. Their rifles gleamed with fresh oil, bandoliers heavy with powder and shot. The procession moved slowly, each hoofbeat drawing them closer to what most considered inevitable justice. 10 miles into their journey, fate intervened. The bay mare, spooked by a rattling branch, reared suddenly. Davy, unable to grip with his bound hands and good leg, toppled sideways. The impact shattered his partially healed leg anew. The crack of breaking bone cut through the morning air, followed by a howl of agony that sent birds scattering from nearby trees. The militiamen carried their prisoner, the remaining 13 miles, in a makeshift litter, 2 saplings lashed together with leather straps, a wool blanket stretched between. They reached Walter's fort as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The wooden stockade cast long shadows across the wheat field, where, just 45 days earlier, Davy had attempted to claim Old Man Walter's scalp. Inside the fort's walls, preparations for a trial moved forward with grim efficiency. A temporary sheriff, elected by the 50 assembled settlers, rode out to summon 12 jurors from neighboring farms. 6 men gathered firewood near the spot where Davy had fallen to the marksman's bullet. Others stripped bark from young trees for kindling, their movements methodical, purposeful. The memory of Colonel Crawford's fate at Sandusky 4 years earlier hung heavy in the air. The officer's death by torture and burning had left deep scars in the settler community. Many viewed Davy's trial as an opportunity for what they called natural justice. An eye for an eye, a burning for a burning. The blockhouse where they held Davy rose 20 feet high, its walls formed from squared logs 12 inches thick. The roof extended 2 feet beyond the walls, supported by protruding joists, a design that allowed defenders to fire down at anyone attempting to burn or breach the structure. 4 guards took up positions inside, though they paid little attention to their prisoner. His shattered leg and 45 days of near starvation had left him barely able to stand. What threat could such a wretch pose? As night deepened, the guards' conversation turned to the coming day's events. They debated the best wood for a slow burn, recalled Crawford's suffering, wondered if their prisoner would show similar courage. None noticed Davy's slow, silent movement toward the blockhouse's far corner. The structure's design, so effective against external threats, provided unexpected advantages to one trapped inside. In the shadows between the protruding joists and overhanging roof, small gaps offered handholds. Davy's wasted frame proved an asset. While the guards discussed tomorrow's justice, he inched upward into the darkness. First light revealed an empty blockhouse. The guards' shouts brought 30 armed men running. They found the ropes that had bound the prisoner coiled neatly on the floor. Tracks in the morning dew showed where he had dropped from the roof's edge. Despite his shattered leg, despite 45 days of near starvation, despite being surrounded by enemies, Davy had vanished into the wilderness once again. The arriving jury found only questions. How had a crippled man scaled the walls? How far could he travel with a freshly broken leg? Had sympathetic guards turned a blind eye to his escape, their humanity overcoming their duty? The sheriff organized search parties, 5 men to the north, 5 to the south, 5 each east and west. They combed the surrounding forest with dogs, but the morning rain had washed away any scent trail. The prisoner who had crawled 23 miles to surrender now crawled away from the justice he had sought. Dawn broke over Walter's fort to reveal an empty blockhouse. The guards' negligence sparked immediate controversy among the settlers. Some whispered that humanity had stayed their vigilance, that they had intentionally turned blind eyes to spare a man from burning. Others demanded punishment for letting a confessed killer escape justice. The search parties spread through the surrounding wilderness. Their dogs nosed through dense underbrush, followed trails that disappeared in rocky streams, only to return each evening with no sign of the fugitive. The forest seemed to have swallowed him whole, leaving not even a broken twig to mark his passage. On the 3rd morning, fate provided an unexpected lead. A young boy, searching for stray horses in the outlying pastures, stumbled upon an extraordinary sight. Through the morning mist, he spotted a gaunt figure balancing against a fallen tree trunk. The escaped prisoner, still wielding his familiar wooden pole, struggled to mount one of the missing horses. The boy watched in stunned silence as the warrior demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness. Using stripped tree bark, He had fashioned a crude but effective bridle for the horse's head. With painstaking effort, he managed to climb onto the animal's back, using the fallen log as a mounting block. One hand gripped the bark reins, while the other clutched his pole, the tool that had served him through weeks of survival, now becoming a steering aid. Despite his broken leg and weakened condition, the escapee guided his mount into a steady trot, heading toward the frontier's edge. The boy, overwhelmed by the sight of this notorious prisoner, dared not reveal himself. Instead, he ran home to raise the alarm, his warning setting a new pursuit in motion. The hunting party picked up the trail while it was still fresh. They followed the horse's tracks until darkness made pursuit impossible, forcing them to make camp. At first light, they resumed the chase, only to find their quarry had employed every trick of wilderness survival. The warrior's path revealed a masterclass in evasion. He led them through countless stream crossings, each one requiring precious time to discover where horse and rider had emerged. He chose routes along hard ridges where hooves left minimal marks. Though slowed by his injuries, his woodcraft proved exceptional. Every chosen path demonstrated both desperation and cunning. The trail wound for 90 miles through increasingly wild territory. When the pursuers finally reached the Allegheny River, they found only the abandoned horse, its coat still damp with sweat in the warm weather. The bark bridle hung loosely around its neck, testament to its rider's ingenuity. The animal's heaving flanks and trembling legs spoke of a hard journey pushed to the limits of endurance. The river marked the boundary of safe pursuit. Beyond its swift waters lay Indian territory where small parties of settlers dared not follow. The escapee had either crossed into that wilderness or met his end in the attempt. The horse's presence suggested the latter. A man in his weakened condition would have faced a formidable challenge in the river's current. Years passed before fragments of the story's ending emerged. After peace returned to the frontier, inquiries revealed that the warrior never reached the nearest tribal settlement at Sandusky, some 200 miles distant. The forest kept the specifics of his fate secret. Whether river, broken leg, or exhaustion finally claimed him remained unknown. His remarkable journey joined the annals of frontier tales. 38 days of survival after the attack on Walter's Fort, a daring escape from certain execution, and a final 90-mile flight toward freedom. The wooden pole that had supported him through it all, from his first desperate crawl to his last bid for survival, disappeared with him into the vast wilderness that separated two worlds at war. The elements that had sustained him, wood, water, and sheer determination, ultimately became either his executioners or his shroud. The forest that had provided him shelter and sustenance during his weeks of healing now kept its counsel about his final moments. In the end, the wilderness proved more final than any jury's verdict, more absolute than any executioner's torch. The demand for Davy's execution at Walter's Fort echoed a deeper history of frontier justice. Just 4 years earlier, Colonel Crawford had led 500 men in an assault on Sandusky, the very settlement Davy tried to reach. After the attack failed, tribal leaders condemned Crawford to death by burning. Their answer to the Gnadenhutten massacre, where Pennsylvania militia had killed 96 peaceful Moravian Christian Indians. The settlers who demanded Davy's death carried this weight of history. The widow of Walter and the mother of the slain girl sought not just personal vengeance, but participation in this established cycle of retaliation. Their call for burning mirrored the fate Crawford suffered, just as his execution had mirrored earlier acts of violence. Yet Davy's story took an unexpected turn. Where Crawford met fire, this wounded warrior found either escape or mercy. His disappearance into the vast wilderness between Pittsburgh and Sandusky added a final mystery to this chronicle of frontier conflict. Histories and Native Tales brings you these authentic accounts from America's past, drawn from historical documents and personal narratives. Subscribe to explore more untold stories that shaped our shared history.